Vincent Crawford had the kind of life most people only dreamed about. At 42 years old, he was one of the highest-paid jazz musicians in the world. His custom-made trumpet, plated in real gold with diamond accents, cost more than a luxury car. When he performed at Lincoln Center or the Hollywood Bowl, tickets would sell out within minutes. His apartment in Manhattan had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and his garage housed 3 sports cars he barely had time to drive. But if you asked anyone who worked with him, they'd tell you the same thing. Vincent had changed over the years. The young, hungry musician who used to play in subway stations for spare change was gone. In his place stood someone who looked down on others, someone who believed his wealth and fame made him superior. He'd forgotten where he came from, and it showed in the way he treated people. On a cold Tuesday evening in November, Vincent's publicist convinced him to appear at a charity event in Brooklyn. He didn't want to go. The venue was a small community center in a neighborhood he'd never visited, and the cause was something about providing music education to underprivileged kids. Vincent agreed only because his accountant mentioned it would look good for his taxes, and his publicist promised it would generate positive press coverage. He arrived in his Mercedes, 40 minutes late, wearing a suit that cost more than some people made in a month. The event coordinator, a nervous woman in her 50s, kept thanking him profusely for coming. Vincent barely looked at her. He was supposed to give a short speech, shake some hands, maybe sign a few autographs, and then leave. Easy money for his image. While waiting backstage in what passed for a green room, basically just a converted storage closet, Vincent heard something that made him stop scrolling through his phone. Someone was playing trumpet. The sound came from down the hallway, muffled but clear enough to recognize the melody. It was a jazz standard, one of the classics, but whoever was playing it wasn't doing it right, at least not the way Vincent would do it. His curiosity got the better of him. He followed the sound to a small practice room at the end of the hall. The door was slightly open, and through the gap he could see a young woman sitting on a folding chair. She couldn't have been more than 20 years old. She wore a faded denim jacket over a plain white shirt, jeans with a small tear at the knee, and sneakers that had seen better days. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she was completely absorbed in her playing. The trumpet she held looked ancient. The brass was tarnished in places, dented in others, and the valves probably stuck half the time. But she played it like it was the most precious thing in the world. Her eyes were closed, and her whole body moved with the music. There was something raw about her playing, something honest that Vincent hadn't heard in years. He pushed the door open wider. The creak made her stop mid-note. She opened her eyes and looked at him, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then recognition flickered across her face. She knew who he was. Everyone in the music world knew Vincent Crawford. "That's not how you play that piece," Vincent said. He didn't mean for it to sound as condescending as it did, but that's how it came out. Years of believing he was always right had trained his voice that way. The young woman, her name was Riley Chen, looked at him for a long moment. She didn't jump up or ask for an autograph or act starstruck like most people did. Instead, she just said, "Maybe not your way, but it's how I play it." Vincent felt something prickle at the back of his neck. Was she actually disagreeing with him? Him? Did she not understand who she was talking to? He'd won 4 Grammy Awards. He'd played for presidents and royalty. He'd been called a genius by critics in every major publication. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he asked, stepping into the small room. "Yeah," Riley said, setting her trumpet down on her lap. "You're Vincent Crawford. You're really famous and really talented, but that doesn't mean your way is the only way." The nerve of this girl. Vincent felt his jaw tighten. She was young, probably still in college, playing a trumpet that looked like it belonged in a pawn shop, in a rundown community center in Brooklyn, and she had the audacity to suggest she knew something he didn't. "Where did you study?" Vincent asked, his tone sharp. "I'm at Brooklyn College," Riley answered. "Community college before that. I work at a coffee shop in the mornings and teach music to kids here 3 afternoons a week." Vincent almost laughed. Brooklyn College. Not Juilliard, not Berkeley, not even a well-known conservatory. Just regular college while working a service job. And she thought she could tell him about music? "How much do you know about jazz theory?" He pressed. "Enough," Riley said calmly. She wasn't being rude, but she wasn't backing down either. "Look, I'm not saying I'm better than you. I'm just saying music isn't always about playing every note perfectly. Sometimes it's about what you feel." That did it. Vincent's ego, already bruised, cracked completely. Before he could stop himself, the words tumbled out. Fine. Let's settle this. You and me, a trumpet duel. Right now. Out there in front of everyone at this charity event. We'll each play one piece and the audience decides who's better. Winner takes $10,000. Riley's eyes widened. $10,000. Vincent could see her doing the mental math. That was probably more money than she made in 6 months at her coffee shop job. That could pay for a whole year of college, maybe more. Her hand unconsciously touched her old trumpet, protective. You're serious? She asked. Completely serious, Vincent said. His competitive nature had taken over now. He needed to prove this girl wrong. Needed to show her and everyone else that there were levels to this game and she wasn't on his. Riley looked down at her trumpet, then back at Vincent. For a moment he thought she might refuse. That would be the smart thing to do, really. She had to know she couldn't win. But then something shifted in her expression. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was the thought of that money. Or maybe she just didn't like being talked down to by someone who thought his wallet made him wise. Okay, she said, standing up. Let's do it, Vincent smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who knew they'd already won and was just waiting for everyone else to figure it out. 20 minutes later, the small auditorium of the community center was packed. Word had spread fast. Vincent Crawford, the Vincent Crawford, was about to compete against a local college student in an impromptu trumpet duel. People who'd been leaving the charity event rushed back in. Volunteers pulled out their phones to record. The event coordinator looked like she might faint from the unexpected excitement. Vincent stood on one side of the small stage, his golden trumpet gleaming under the lights. Riley stood on the other side, her battered instrument looking almost pathetic in comparison. The contrast was stark. Wealth versus poverty, fame versus obscurity, professional versus amateur. The coordinator explained the rules quickly. Each would play one piece of their choosing. The audience would applaud for their favorite, and the loudest applause would determine the winner. Simple enough. Vincent volunteered to go first. Of course he did. He wanted to set the bar impossibly high. Wanted to make Riley understand just how out of her depth she really was. As he raised his trumpet to his lips, he felt the familiar rush of confidence. This was what he did. This was who he was. What Vincent didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know in that moment, was that the next 10 minutes would change everything. Not just for tonight, but for the rest of his life. Vincent took his position at center stage, feeling the weight of every eye in the room on him. This was his element. This was where he thrived. The stage lights warmed his face, and he could see dozens of phone cameras pointed in his direction. Good. Let them record this. Let them see what real talent looked like. He'd chosen one of the most technically demanding pieces in jazz history. It was a composition that required lightning-fast finger work, perfect breath control, and flawless timing. Most professional musicians struggled with it. He'd seen conservatory graduates crash and burn attempting it, but Vincent had performed it hundreds of times in concert halls around the world. He could play it in his sleep. The room fell silent as he brought the golden trumpet to his lips. Then he began. The notes flew from his instrument like arrows, each one hitting its target with surgical precision. His fingers danced across the valves in a blur of movement. High notes that would make most players' lips bleed came out pure and clear. He hit runs that seemed physically impossible, transitioning from low register to high register and back again without missing a beat. It was a masterclass in technical excellence. The audience sat frozen, mesmerized by what they were witnessing. This wasn't just good playing. This was virtuoso-level performance, the kind of thing you had to see live to truly appreciate. Vincent's years of training, his natural talent, his expensive instrument, all of it came together in a display of musical dominance. He finished with a flourish, holding the final note longer than seemed humanly possible before letting it fade into silence. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then the applause erupted. People jumped to their feet, clapping and cheering. Someone whistled. A few people shouted, "Bravo!" Vincent lowered his trumpet and took a bow, soaking in the adulation. He could see Riley standing in the wings, still waiting for her turn, and he caught her eye. See? That's how it's done. The applause went on for nearly a minute before the coordinator had to quiet everyone down. Vincent walked to the side of the stage, feeling victorious. There was no way Riley could follow that. No possible way. He'd essentially won already. This whole thing would be over in a few minutes. He'd collect his appearance fee for the charity event. and this girl would learn an important lesson about staying in her lane. Riley walked to center stage holding her old trumpet. Under the lights, the instrument's flaws were even more visible. The dents, the tarnish, the worn-down valve caps. It looked like something you'd find at a garage sale. Next to Vincent's gleaming golden trumpet, it was almost embarrassing. A few people in the audience whispered to each other, probably wondering how this was going to go. Riley stood there for a moment, not saying anything. She looked nervous, Vincent noticed. Her hand shook slightly as she adjusted her grip. Good. She should be nervous. She was about to humiliate herself in front of 100 people. Then Riley spoke, her voice quiet but clear. I'm going to play Amazing Grace. My grandmother taught me this song on this trumpet before she passed away 2 years ago. This was her trumpet. She bought it used in 1967 and played it for 50 years. Every dent, every scratch, it all means something. So that's what I'm playing tonight. Vincent felt a flicker of annoyance. Was she trying to win sympathy points? Using her dead grandmother for emotional manipulation? That was a cheap move. Music should speak for itself, not rely on sob stories. Riley raised the trumpet to her lips and began to play. The first note was simple, pure, unadorned. Nothing fancy, nothing technical. Just a clear, honest sound that filled the small auditorium. Then the second note and the third. Amazing Grace was about as basic as songs got. Every beginning trumpet student learned it. There were no complicated runs, no dazzling high notes, no impressive techniques. It was just melody, plain and simple. But something was happening in that room that Vincent didn't expect. Riley played each note like it mattered, like it carried weight. She wasn't trying to impress anyone with speed or range. She was telling a story. You could hear it in the way she shaped each phrase, the way she let certain notes linger while others passed quickly. She played of loss and love, of struggle and hope. She played of her grandmother's hands guiding her young fingers on the valves, of late-night practice sessions in a cramped apartment, of dreams that seemed impossible but still worth reaching for. The audience wasn't just listening. They were feeling. Vincent could see it on their faces. An older woman in the third row had tears streaming down her cheeks. A teenage boy in the back had his eyes closed, swaying slightly. The coordinator, who'd been so nervous earlier, stood completely still, transfixed. Riley played of her family's journey, of working 2 jobs while going to school, of teaching kids in this very building who reminded her of herself at that age, kids who couldn't afford fancy instruments or private lessons but who loved music anyway. She played of every morning shift at the coffee shop, every late-night study session, every time someone told her she should be more practical and give up on music. She played of refusing to give up. Vincent felt something twist in his chest. This wasn't supposed to be happening. This was just a simple song, played on a beat-up trumpet by someone with a fraction of his training. But somehow, impossibly, it was moving people in a way his technically perfect performance hadn't. Riley approached the final verse, and she did something unexpected. She made a small mistake. Her finger slipped on one of the sticky valves and a note came out slightly flat. For a split second, Vincent thought, there it is. She messed up. But Riley didn't stop or get flustered. She just kept playing. And somehow that small imperfection made the moment more real, more human, more honest. When she played the final note, she let it fade slowly, naturally, like a breath releasing. The silence that followed was different from the silence after Vincent's performance. It was deeper, heavier, full of emotion. Then the applause began. But it wasn't just applause. People were standing, clapping, some of them crying openly. The sound was thunderous, even louder than what Vincent had received. It went on and on, people not wanting it to stop, not wanting the moment to end. Riley stood there looking almost surprised, like she hadn't expected this reaction. She lowered her trumpet and gave a small, genuine smile. Vincent stood frozen on the side of the stage, his golden trumpet hanging at his side. He felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not exactly. Something worse. Doubt. For the first time in a very long time, he questioned himself. The coordinator eventually managed to quiet the crowd. She looked between Vincent and Riley, clearly uncomfortable with what she had to do next. Well, she said into the microphone, that was incredible. Both performances were amazing in their own ways. I think we should call this a tie. Both performers will receive $5,000 from tonight's fundraiser. The audience applauded the decision, though Vincent could tell most of them thought Riley had won. He could see it in their faces, hear it in the way they'd reacted. A tie was a diplomatic solution, a way to avoid embarrassing him publicly. But everyone in that room knew the truth. Riley had matched him. This college student with her dead grandmother's trumpet and no fancy credentials had stood on the same stage and moved people just as much, if not more, than he had with all his training and talent and expensive equipment. Vincent watched as people crowded around Riley, congratulating her, asking to take photos. The teenage students from the community center's music program surrounded her like she was a celebrity. An elderly man shook her hand and told her she reminded him of his daughter. A young mother thanked her for inspiring her son to keep practicing. Meanwhile, Vincent stood alone. A few people came up to compliment his technical skill, but their words felt hollow. They were saying what they thought they should say to a famous musician, not what they truly felt. As the crowd began to disperse, Vincent found himself replaying Riley's performance in his head. It hadn't been perfect. It hadn't been technically impressive, but it had been real in a way his playing hadn't been for years, maybe decades. When had he stopped playing from the heart? When had music become about proving his superiority instead of expressing something true? He looked down at his golden trumpet, the one that cost more than most people's annual salary. For the first time, it felt heavy in his hands. Not physically heavy, but weighted with something else. All the years of ego, of looking down on others, of believing that wealth and fame made him better than everyone else. It all pressed down on him in that moment. Riley walked past him carrying her case, heading for the exit. She paused and looked at him. "You played really well," she said. There was no sarcasm in her voice, no gloating. She meant it. Vincent opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. What could he say? Riley gave him a small nod and continued toward the door. Vincent stood alone on that stage in a Brooklyn community center, surrounded by empty chairs and fading applause, and for the first time in 20 years, he wondered if he'd lost something far more valuable than any competition. Vincent couldn't sleep that night. He lay in his king-sized bed in his Manhattan penthouse, staring at the ceiling, replaying Riley's performance over and over in his mind. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard that simple melody, saw the faces of people in the audience as they were moved to tears. It bothered him in a way he couldn't explain. By 3 in the morning, he'd given up on sleep entirely. He sat by his floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the city lights, his golden trumpet resting on the table beside him. He picked it up and tried to play, but every note felt empty. Technically perfect, but hollow, like eating expensive food that had no taste. The next morning, Vincent did something he hadn't done in years. He went back to Brooklyn. He'd gotten Riley's work schedule from the community center coordinator, who was more than happy to help the famous Vincent Crawford. Apparently, Riley worked the morning shift at a coffee shop called the Daily Grind, just 3 blocks from the community center. The place was small and busy, filled with college students typing on laptops and construction workers grabbing breakfast before work. The smell of fresh coffee and toasted bagels filled the air. Vincent felt out of place in his expensive coat and designer shoes. Everyone else looked normal, lived normal lives, worried about normal things like rent and bills and getting to class on time. Riley was behind the counter, her hair tied back, wearing an apron with coffee stains on it. She was laughing at something a regular customer said while she made his drink. When she looked up and saw Vincent standing in line, her smile faltered for just a second. Surprise, maybe confusion, crossed her face, but she recovered quickly. "What can I get you?" she asked when he reached the front of the line. "Just black coffee," Vincent said. Then, after a pause, "And maybe 5 minutes of your time when you get a break?" Riley studied his face, probably trying to figure out what he wanted. "My break's in 20 minutes. Table in the back corner, I'll come find you." Vincent took his coffee and sat at the small wooden table she'd indicated. He watched her work, noticed how she remembered people's names and their usual orders, how she made small talk that seemed genuine, not forced. She belonged here in a way he didn't belong anywhere anymore. When Riley finally slid into the chair across from him, she looked tired but curious. "So what's this about? You want a rematch or something?" "No," Vincent said. He'd rehearsed this conversation in his head a dozen times driving over. But now that he was here, the words felt awkward. "I want to make you an offer." Riley raised an eyebrow. "What kind of offer?" "I want to be your mentor," Vincent said, leaning forward. "I want to train you, Pay for your education at Juilliard, give you access to the best instruments, the best teachers. I want to open doors for you that took me decades to access. You'd tour with me, perform as my opening act. Eventually, we'd collaborate on albums, concerts. You have raw talent, Riley, real talent. But you need refinement, proper training, exposure to the right people. Riley sat back in her chair, her expression unreadable. And what do you get out of this? Vincent hadn't expected that question. What do you mean? I mean, you're one of the most famous trumpet players in the world. You don't need me, so why are you really doing this? The honest answer was complicated. Vincent wasn't even sure he understood it himself. Was it guilt? Was it because she'd reminded him of something he'd lost? Was it ego, wanting to prove he could mold her into something even greater? Maybe all of those things. Because you reminded me why music matters, he said finally. And because you deserve a chance that people like me had. A real chance, not just scraping by. Riley was quiet for a long moment, staring down at the table. Vincent could see her thinking, calculating. $5,000 had been life-changing for her. He knew that. But what he was offering now was so much more. A full scholarship to the most prestigious music school in the country. Professional instruments. A career path that could set her up for life. I'd have to quit my job here, Riley said slowly. Drop out of Brooklyn College. Move probably. Yes, Vincent confirmed. Training would be full-time. But I'd cover everything. Housing, food, tuition, instruments. You wouldn't have to worry about money. And the community center? The kids I teach? Vincent waved his hand dismissively. You could find time for that eventually. But initially you'd need to focus completely on your training. No distractions. Something flickered across Riley's face at the word distractions. But it was gone before Vincent could identify it. She chewed her bottom lip, thinking. Vincent could practically see her imagining it. No more waking up at 5 in the morning to open the coffee shop. No more juggling work and school and teaching. Just music all day, every day. The dream. Can I think about it? Riley asked. Of course, Vincent said, though he was surprised. He'd expected her to say yes immediately. What was there to think about? He was offering her everything. Give me 3 days, Riley said. I need to talk to some people. Vincent nodded and stood up. 3 days. But Riley, opportunities like this don't come around often. Don't overthink it. Over the next 3 days, Riley did exactly what she said she would. She talked to people. Her mother, who worked double shifts as a nurse and had sacrificed everything to send Riley to college, told her to follow her heart but be careful. Her best friend from high school, now studying engineering, warned her that rich people always wanted something in return. Her mentor at Brooklyn College, an older jazz musician who taught part-time, told her that Vincent Crawford was brilliant but had a reputation for being controlling. But it was the kids at the community center who gave her the most pause. When she told them she might be leaving, their faces fell. Who's going to teach us? Asked Tommy, a 12-year-old who'd just started making real progress on trumpet. You're the only teacher who gets it. Riley promised she'd find someone to replace her, but even as she said it, she knew it wasn't the same. These kids needed someone who understood their struggles, who'd been where they were, someone who saw potential in them that others missed. On the 3rd day, Riley called Vincent and told him yes. She'd accept his offer. Vincent felt a surge of satisfaction. This was going to work. He was going to take this rough diamond and polish it until it shined. He'd create something magnificent. The transition happened fast. Within 2 weeks, Riley had moved into the guest suite in Vincent's penthouse. The room alone was bigger than her entire apartment had been. It had its own bathroom, a practice space, and a view of Central Park that made her feel like she was living in a movie. Vincent had a professional trumpet delivered to her on the first day. It was beautiful, perfectly balanced with a tone that made her old trumpet sound like a toy. He'd also arranged her schedule. 8 in the morning to noon, technical exercises and classical training. Lunch break, 1 to 4 jazz theory and improvisation. 4 to 6 physical conditioning and breathing exercises. After dinner, listening sessions and analysis of famous performances. At first, Riley was overwhelmed but excited. She was learning so much so fast. Vincent was a demanding teacher, but he was brilliant. He could hear tiny imperfections in her playing that she didn't even notice. He taught her techniques she'd never known existed. He broke down complex pieces into manageable parts and showed her exactly how to master each one. But slowly, something started to change. Vincent would stop her mid-phrase and make her repeat it exactly the way he'd shown her. When she tried to add her own interpretation, he'd shake his head. "That's not how it's done. Trust me, I've been doing this for 20 years. When Riley asked if she could visit the community center to check on her students, Vincent frowned. "You need to stay focused. Those kids will be fine. Right now, you need to prioritize your development." Her phone calls with her mother got shorter, less frequent. Her friends stopped texting as much after Riley had to cancel plans for the third time in a row. The coffee shop replaced her, and she realized she missed the simple routine of making lattes and chatting with regular customers. 3 months into the arrangement, Riley was technically better than she'd ever been. She could play pieces she'd once thought impossible. Her range had expanded, her tone was richer, her technique was nearly flawless. By every measurable standard, she was becoming an exceptional musician. But when she played alone in her room late at night, trying to recapture the feeling she'd had at that community center performance, she couldn't find it. The music was perfect, but it didn't mean anything. It was like speaking a language fluently, but having nothing to say. Vincent noticed her progress and was pleased. His plan was working. He'd polished away the rough edges, the imperfections, the unrefined quality of her playing. In 6 more months, she'd be ready to perform with him publicly. He was creating his masterpiece. What Vincent didn't notice was the light slowly fading from Riley's eyes. He didn't see how she hesitated now before playing, second-guessing every choice. He didn't hear the absence of joy in her music. He was so focused on making her technically perfect that he missed the fact that he was taking away the very thing that made her special in the first place. Riley stood at the window of her guest suite one evening, looking out at the city lights, holding the professional trumpet Vincent had given her. It was worth more than her mother made in a year. It was perfect in every way, and she hated it. 6 months had passed since Riley moved into Vincent's penthouse. From the outside, everything looked perfect. She was enrolled at Juilliard on a full scholarship that Vincent had arranged. Her technical skills had improved dramatically. She practiced 8 hours a day, sometimes more. Vincent had her on a schedule that left no room for anything he considered wasteful. But Riley barely recognized herself anymore. She'd stopped calling her mother as often because every conversation ended with her mom asking if she was happy. And Riley didn't know how to answer that question. Her old friends from Brooklyn had mostly stopped reaching out. She hadn't been back to the community center in months. The kids she used to teach probably didn't even remember her anymore. The person staring back at her in the mirror looked successful. She wore nicer clothes now, ate at expensive restaurants when Vincent took her to network with music industry people, and had access to opportunities most musicians only dreamed about. But her eyes looked tired. Not physically tired, though the schedule was exhausting. Something deeper, like a part of her was slowly going to sleep. Vincent had big plans for their upcoming tour. He'd arranged for Riley to open for him at 15 venues across the country, starting with a major performance at the Chicago Symphony Center. It was the kind of opportunity that could launch a career. Vincent had hired a full orchestra, booked the venue, and spent weeks planning every detail of the show. Today was their final full rehearsal before the tour began. Vincent had rented out a performance hall and brought in the entire orchestra, 20 professional musicians, each one paid handsomely for their time. The conductor was a friend of Vincent's who'd worked with him for years. Everything was in place. Riley stood on stage with her trumpet, the expensive one Vincent had given her. She had sheet music in front of her, every note precisely written out. Vincent had composed a duet specifically for this tour, a piece that showcased both their talents. He'd spent months on it, crafting every phrase, every transition, every harmony. The problem was he'd written it entirely in his style. Every note Riley played had been dictated by him. When she'd suggested a small change in one section, something that felt more natural to her, he'd shut it down immediately. "Stick to what's written," he'd said. "I know what works." The rehearsal began. The orchestra played the introduction, and Vincent came in with his part, flawless as always. Then it was Riley's turn. She played exactly what was written, hitting every note perfectly. Her tone was beautiful, her technique impeccable. Vincent had trained her well, but halfway through the piece, Riley felt something break inside her. She was playing someone else's music in someone else's style, becoming someone else's version of what a musician should be. This wasn't her voice. These weren't her ideas. She was just an instrument Vincent was playing, not an artist in her own right. She tried to push through, but her fingers felt heavy on the valves. The notes came out technically correct but emotionally dead. She sounded like a computer program, perfect but lifeless. Vincent noticed immediately. He raised his hand and the orchestra stopped playing. "What's wrong?" he asked, annoyance creeping into his voice. "You're dragging the tempo. Stay with the conductor." "Sorry," Riley said quietly. "Let me try again." They started over. This time, Riley tried to add a little bit of herself to the performance. Just a small variation in one phrase, a slight change in how she approached a particular passage. Nothing major, just enough to feel like she was actually playing music and not just executing commands. Vincent's hand shot up again. The orchestra stopped. "Riley, what are you doing?" "That's not what I wrote." "I know," Riley said. "I just thought maybe if I—" "You thought wrong," Vincent interrupted. His voice was sharp, cutting. "This is a professional performance with a hired orchestra. We don't have time for experimentation. Play what's written or we'll have a serious problem." The orchestra members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The conductor looked down at his score, trying to stay out of it. Riley felt her face flush with embarrassment. She was being scolded like a child in front of all these professional musicians. "I'm just trying to bring some feeling to it," Riley said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Feeling?" Vincent set his trumpet down. "You want to know what I'm feeling right now?" "Frustrated. I've invested 6 months in your training, thousands of dollars, countless hours of my time. I've opened doors for you that most musicians never get to walk through. And now, right before the biggest performance of your life, you decide you want to improvise. That's not what I'm saying." "Then what are you saying, Riley? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're letting nerves get the better of you. You're overthinking instead of trusting your training." "Instead of trusting me?" Riley looked down at her trumpet, the expensive, perfect instrument that had never felt like it belonged to her. 6 months ago, she'd stood on a stage with her grandmother's old trumpet and moved people to tears. Now she stood with the finest instrument money could buy and couldn't feel anything at all. "What if you're wrong?" The words came out before Riley could stop them. The room went completely silent. Vincent stared at her like she'd just spoken in a foreign language. "Excuse me. What if your way isn't the only way?" Riley said louder now. "What if music isn't just about following rules and playing everything perfectly? What if it's supposed to mean something?" Vincent's face darkened. "Are you seriously lecturing me about music? Me? Do you have any idea how many people would kill for the opportunity you're throwing away right now?" "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm just saying maybe we could—" "We're done for today," Vincent said coldly. He turned to the orchestra. "Everyone take a break. We'll resume in an hour." Then to Riley, "My office. Now." Riley followed Vincent to the small office attached to the rehearsal hall. Her heart was pounding. She'd never seen him this angry. He closed the door behind them and turned to face her. "Let me be very clear," Vincent said. "You have 2 choices. You can follow my instructions, perform this piece exactly as written, and have a successful career in music. Or you can keep questioning everything, insist on doing things your way, and go back to serving coffee in Brooklyn while teaching kids who'll never amount to anything. Those are your options." The words hit Riley like a physical blow. The kids who'll never amount to anything. He was talking about Tommy and all the other students she'd abandoned to come here. Kids who loved music despite having nothing, who practiced on broken instruments because it was all they could afford, who showed up every week because someone finally believed in them. Riley thought about those kids. Then she thought about herself 6 months ago, playing her grandmother's trumpet in that community center. She'd been happy then, poor and struggling, working 2 jobs and barely scraping by, but genuinely happy. When had she last felt that way? "I need some air," Riley said. "We have rehearsal in an hour," Vincent reminded her. "Be back here, ready to work. And Riley, when you come back, I expect you to have your head on straight. No more of this artistic rebellion nonsense. Understood?" Riley nodded, but she wasn't really listening anymore. She walked out of the office, past the orchestra members on their break, and out into the street. The afternoon sun was bright and the city noise was overwhelming after the quiet of the rehearsal hall. She started walking with no destination in mind, just needing to move, to think, to breathe. She found herself on a subway heading to Brooklyn before she'd consciously decided to go there. 40 minutes later, she was standing outside the community center. It looked exactly the same. The same worn steps, the same faded paint, the same hand-drawn poster in the window advertising free music lessons for kids. Riley pushed open the door. She could hear music coming from down the hall. Trumpet music. Someone was in the practice room. She walked toward the sound and looked through the small window in the door. Tommy was there, the 12-year-old she'd taught for months before leaving. He was playing her grandmother's old trumpet. Riley had left it at the center when she moved out, unable to take it with her into her new life. Tommy was playing Amazing Grace, the same song she'd performed the night she met Vincent. He wasn't playing it perfectly. His tone was rough and he missed some notes, but he was playing it with his whole heart, his eyes closed, completely absorbed in the music. Just like she used to be. Riley stood there watching him and something clicked into place. This was real. This mattered. Not the expensive halls or the professional orchestras or the famous mentor. This kid pouring his heart into a beat-up trumpet, learning that music could be a refuge and a voice and a way to express things words couldn't capture. She'd given this up for technical perfection and career opportunities. She'd traded joy for precision, meaning for success. And in doing so, she'd lost herself. Riley pulled out her phone and looked at the time. The rehearsal was supposed to resume in 20 minutes. Vincent would be furious if she didn't show up. He might cancel the tour, withdraw his support, end their arrangement. Everything she'd worked for the past 6 months would disappear. Good, Riley thought. Let it disappear. She turned off her phone and walked into the practice room. Tommy looked up when the door opened, his eyes widening when he saw Riley standing there. "Miss Riley," he practically shouted, setting down the trumpet and running over to her. "You're back. Where have you been? We've missed you so much." Riley felt tears prick her eyes as the 12-year-old hugged her. "I've missed you too, Tommy. I'm sorry I've been gone so long. Are you staying now? Are you going to teach us again?" His face was full of hope, and Riley realized how much these kids had counted on her. "I don't know yet," Riley said honestly, "but I'm here now."
"Can I hear what you've been working on?"
For the next hour, Riley sat in that practice room listening to Tommy play. He showed her everything he'd learned from the substitute teacher. A nice older man who knew music theory but didn't quite understand these kids the way Riley had. Tommy had improved, but he'd also become more tentative, more worried about making mistakes. "You're playing scared," Riley said gently, "like you're afraid of messing up." "Mr. Peterson says I need to focus on playing it right," Tommy explained. "He stops me every time I make a mistake." Riley felt a pang in her chest. She'd been doing the same thing with Vincent, playing scared, so focused on technical perfection that she'd forgotten what music was supposed to feel like. "Can I show you something?" she asked. She picked up her grandmother's old trumpet, the one she hadn't touched in 6 months. The moment her fingers wrapped around it, something inside her relaxed. The valves were still sticky, the brass still tarnished, but it felt like coming home. Riley played Amazing Grace the way she'd played it that night at the charity event. Not perfectly, not with flawless technique, but with feeling, with memory and hope and all the things that made music matter. When she finished, Tommy was staring at her with wide eyes. "That's how you're supposed to play it," Riley said. "Not perfectly, honestly." Over the next few days, Riley made some big decisions. She went back to Vincent's penthouse when she knew he'd be out and packed her things. She left the expensive trumpet on the piano with a note that just said, "Thank you, but I can't do this." She moved back into her tiny apartment in Brooklyn, the one she'd sublet to a friend while she was gone. She picked up shifts at the daily grind again. Her manager was happy to have her back. She re-enrolled at Brooklyn College for the spring semester, and most importantly, she returned to the community center and took back her teaching position. The kids were overjoyed. They threw her an impromptu welcome-back party with grocery store cake and off-key singing. Riley had never been happier to see messy frosting and hear unprofessional music in her life. Vincent called her dozens of times. She didn't answer. He left voicemails that progressed from confused to angry to finally grudgingly disappointed. "You're making a mistake," his last message said. "You're throwing away a real future for what? To teach kids in a basement? You'll regret this, Riley." But Riley didn't regret it. For the first time in 6 months, she woke up excited about her day. She taught morning classes at the community center, worked afternoon shifts at the coffee shop, attended evening classes at Brooklyn College, and somehow it felt less exhausting than her scheduled life in Manhattan had been, because this life was hers. These choices were hers. 3 months passed. Riley settled back into her rhythm, reconnecting with her mother, her friends, her music. She started playing small gigs at local venues, nothing fancy, just honest performances at coffee shops and community events. People responded to her playing the same way they had that first night. Not because she was technically perfect, but because she meant it. Then one Tuesday evening, Riley was at the community center helping Tommy prepare for his first public performance at the spring showcase. They were working on a piece together when the door to the practice room opened. Vincent stood there looking different than she remembered, older somehow, or maybe just tired. "Hi," he said quietly. Riley's first instinct was to ask him to leave, but something in his expression stopped her. He didn't look angry or superior. He looked uncertain, which was not an emotion she'd ever associated with Vincent Crawford. "Tommy, take a break," Riley said. "Go get some water. We'll finish in a few minutes." Tommy looked between them curiously but left, closing the door behind him. Riley and Vincent stood in silence for a moment. "I came to hear you play," Vincent said finally. "The real you, not the version I tried to create." Riley didn't know what to say to that. "Why?" "Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about what you said. About music meaning something." Vincent sat down on one of the folding chairs, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked humble. "I attended a concert last week. One of my protégés, a pianist I'd trained 5 years ago. Technically flawless performance, standing ovation, great reviews. And I sat there feeling absolutely nothing, just like you probably felt playing my compositions." Riley sat down across from him. "Vincent, let me finish," he said. "I went home that night and tried to remember the last time I played music because I wanted to, not because I had to or because someone was paying me. I couldn't remember. It's been years, maybe decades. I've been so focused on being perfect, on being the best, on proving I was better than everyone else, that I forgot why I started playing in the first place." He looked at her directly. "You reminded me of that. That night at the charity event, you played with more heart in 3 minutes than I'd played with in 3 years. And instead of learning from you, I tried to change you. I tried to turn you into me. You gave me opportunities I never would have had," Riley said. "The training, the education." "The training was good," Vincent interrupted. "But the rest of it? The control, the rigid schedules trying to erase everything that made you unique? That was my ego. That was me trying to create a perfect student to prove I was a perfect teacher. I was wrong." Riley didn't know what to say. She'd imagined this conversation 100 times, always with her telling him off, explaining why she'd left, defending her choices. She'd never imagined him apologizing. "I'm not asking you to come back," Vincent continued. "What you're doing here, it's important. Those kids need you, but I was hoping maybe you'd let me watch you teach sometime. Maybe remind me what music is supposed to be about." Riley thought about it. Part of her wanted to say no, to keep Vincent and everything he represented far away from this place that mattered to her. But another part of her remembered that he'd given her a chance when no one else would have. He'd believed in her talent even if he'd gone about developing it the wrong way. "You can stay for today's class," Riley said. "But you watch only. No coaching, no corrections, no suggestions. Just watch." Vincent nodded. "Deal." Tommy came back and Riley introduced him to Vincent. The boy's eyes went wide. "You're Vincent Crawford. You're like super famous." "I am," Vincent agreed. "But Miss Riley is a better teacher than I ever was. I'm here to learn from her." Over the next 2 hours, Vincent sat in the corner and watched Riley teach. He saw how she encouraged the kids when they made mistakes, how she helped them find their own musical voices instead of imposing hers, how she made music feel joyful instead of stressful. He watched her play with them, laugh with them, celebrate their small victories. When the class ended and the kids filed out, Vincent approached Riley. "You're doing something special here," he said. "Something more important than any concert hall performance." "It matters to me," Riley said simply. "It should matter to everyone." Vincent paused, then said, "I want to help. Not by taking over or changing anything, but by supporting what you're already doing. These kids need instruments, right? And sheet music. Maybe some repairs on that air conditioning unit I noticed was broken." Riley looked at him skeptically. "What's the catch?" "No catch," Vincent said. "Consider it an apology, or maybe payment for the lesson you just taught me." He pulled out a business card and wrote a number on the back. "That's my personal cell. Call me when you need something for the program. Instruments, funding, whatever. I can't undo the last 6 months, but I can try to do better going forward. After Vincent left, Riley stood in the empty practice room holding his card. She thought about throwing it away, about maintaining her independence, about not owing him anything. But then she thought about Tommy and all the other kids who could benefit from new instruments and better resources. She tucked the card into her pocket. Maybe people could change. Maybe mistakes could lead to something better. Maybe this whole experience, as painful as it had been, was leading somewhere good. 6 months later, Riley performed at a small venue in Brooklyn, playing her grandmother's old trumpet. The audience was filled with her students, her family, her friends from the neighborhood, and in the back row, sitting quietly, was Vincent. He didn't announce himself or try to take credit for her success. He just listened, really listened, to music that came from somewhere real. When Riley finished playing, the applause was loud and genuine. Vincent didn't try to talk to her afterward. He simply left a note on his seat that said, "Thank you for reminding me what matters." Riley found the note after everyone had left. She smiled, tucked it into her trumpet case next to a photo of her grandmother, and walked home through the Brooklyn streets she'd never really left. She had a morning shift at the coffee shop tomorrow, then afternoon classes, then evening lessons at the community center. It wasn't a glamorous life. It wasn't the life Vincent had offered her, but it was hers. Lived on her own terms, filled with music that meant something. And that, Riley had learned, was worth more than all the gold trumpets and concert halls in the world.